From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. It's Thursday, September 21. For 4 years now, Joe Biden has had a niggling problem that has threatened his ability to function as president. Since 2019, there have been rumors floating around that his son, Hunter Biden, has capitalized on access to his famous father in business dealings with people in China and Ukraine. Then last week, Hunter was indicted on federal firearms charges for which he faces a possible criminal trial. Today, digital foreign editor Chris Zappone on whether the activities of Hunter Biden could sink his father's bid for a second term as president, and why Hunter's laptop is at the center of everything. So, Chris, first of all, can you tell us about Hunter Biden? Who is he? Because he's long made headlines and not happy ones.
Well, Hunter Biden is the second son of Joe Biden, the second oldest. He is a lawyer and a businessman and a lobbyist. He's had a bit of a troubled past, I guess you'd say, with quite a few episodes involving drugs and alcohol. But it's probably important to go back to talk about his childhood. So he was in the car crash that had killed his mother and his sister in 1972, that also left himself, Hunter, and his brother, Beau, injured pretty severely. And this trauma has sort of foreshadowed this life he's had that has involved drugs and alcohol and affairs and things of that nature that have made for some very sort of colorful reading.
Okay, but none of this is arguably relevant to Joe Biden's ability to function as president. And yet, Joe Biden is now facing an impeachment inquiry for allegedly illegal and corrupt business dealings with foreign entities. And all of this pretty much began with Hunter Biden's laptop, right? So how was Hunter's laptop discovered, and what was on it?
So in 2019, his laptop appeared at a computer repair shop in Delaware. At the time, the owner of the repair shop, when he realized that this belonged to Hunter Biden and it was left behind, it was abandoned under law, it became his property. So he turned this over to the FBI and copied the contents of this laptop. Over time, when he never heard back from the FBI, he feared that this wasn't going to become a news story. So he passed a copy of the contents on to a lawyer of Rudy Giuliani, who was an aide to Donald Trump. So you can sort of see the plot sort of stirring here. It sounds incredible. The story itself sounds incredible that this laptop will be turned over with all this information on it.
It was a water-damaged laptop left and apparently forgotten at a computer repair shop. And when the repair guy saw what was on it, he says he became concerned, and not just because of the dirty pictures he saw.
Coming out in September, it's called Laptop from Hell. What's really curious is...
On it, there's over 100,000 emails, just like anybody else's laptop. Also, 9,000 photos, some of them of explicit photos of Hunter Biden in various moments with what appear to be prostitutes or using what appear to be drugs.
Showing those embarrassing images of Biden looking strung out, smoking crack, wielding a gun.
The emails, a lot of them were, mundane business emails, but there were emails in there that involved some of his dealings as a lobbyist. So he's dealing with foreign nationals on business ventures and the like. So they made for some very interesting reading.
There was an email that said, "My dad will be there." So why was his dad there with representatives of business people from Kazakhstan, Russia, the Ukraine? Again, this has got to be...
This information was passed over eventually to somebody, the New York Post, who published a story in 2020.
Okay, so the content of these emails and their allegations is now forming the basis for the inquiry into Joe Biden's impeachment, which House of Representatives Speaker Kevin McCarthy announced last week. So what are some of the claims that the inquiry is likely to focus on?
So, the wheels are turning on this.
House Republicans have uncovered serious and credible allegations into President Biden's conduct.
And at the heart of it is the question about whether or not President Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden were involved in business transactions where Hunter traded on access to his father, who at the time that these emails date from was vice president.
Through our investigations, we have found that President Biden did lie to the American people about his own knowledge of his family's foreign business dealings.
So there were events apparently where Joe Biden was on the phone or on a speakerphone where Hunter Biden was speaking to one of his business partners for a particular venture.
Eyewitnesses have testified that the president joined on multiple phone calls and had multiple interactions. Dinners resulted in cars and millions of dollars into his son's and his son's business partners.
This has been investigated even by Republicans in the House. They've brought in Hunter Biden's former business partner who himself had been indicted at a certain point. And they asked him, has any wrongdoing occurred in your view? And he said, no, none that I'm aware of. So it is something where the optics don't look good, but to date, there's no evidence that wrongdoing has occurred. So this is what is being scrutinized by the Impeachment Inquiry Committee.
We are committed to getting the answers for the American public. Nothing more, nothing less. We will go wherever the evidence takes us.
And just to be clear, the particular business dealings that we're talking about here was regarding the Ukrainian energy company that was paying Joe Biden's son, Hunter, who was on the board of its directors. And there was this sort of conspiracy theory that Joe Biden, as vice president, pressured someone in the Ukraine to fire a prosecutor who was probing corruption at that energy company. Is that right?
That's right. And that has been debunked. But it's important that you mention that it's a conspiracy theory because it's something that sort of continues to surface. The claim continues to chew up time and attention in the public, but there hasn't been any basis for it, substantiating it. So it is something where, you've got these facts that we've discussed here, and then they veer into something that's a little bit more of a fever dream that's been pushed by partisans that are very much opposed to Biden. And it's this muddying of the waters that gives this topic such life, because every time we think that it's sort of settled or somebody's come forward and said, look, there's nothing here, it gets reanimated again and it gets another sort of spin through the headlines.
Okay, and so to be clear, there's been these allegations that Hunter Biden has lined his own pockets by using his dad, who was then vice president, as a sort of bargaining chip. That would be a cause for concern, but like you say, these allegations emerged years ago, and since then, not one, but two Republican Senate committees have dismissed the allegations. Is that right?
That's right. And one of the reasons that the Hunter Biden laptop has such psychic power in the minds of the public, but particularly for Republicans, is the backstory to this New York Post article from 2020. So this article was written, and when it went live, the social media platforms at that time, which were very much in a nervous state following the 2016 election, where there was documented Russian interference in the U.S. election, these platforms were advised that this story about this laptop that seemed so improbable had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. So based on that advice, they blocked the story from the New York Post. From the perspective of the New York Post and the Republicans and those who opposed the Biden candidacy, this was an overt act of interference or intervention on the part of social media companies for the benefit of Joe Biden, for a story that actually was legitimate. The thing is that nobody seems to remember that at the time, people just weren't sure if this was an actual legitimate story. And so this is something that's really consumed the right-wing media ecosystem, because to them, this is just a brazen example of the elites of the social media world aligned in a conspiracy with the elites of the Democratic Party to rob the Republicans of their ability to try to shape the election and to influence the election in a way that would have benefited Donald Trump. Republican partisans or right-wing partisans have written books about this. So this is something that gives the whole notion or the concept of the laptop of Hunter Biden such psychic power, and it continues today.
And this is fascinating, though, because there was a sweeping Republican House committee investigation of the Biden family, which found no evidence of wrongdoing. That was just in 2023, this year. So if the case for a corruption charge around Hunter Biden and by extension Joe Biden is so weak, then why do we keep hearing about it?
Well, because it speaks to another sort of weakness which we're witnessing, and that's the weakness of the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, to control the Republicans. So he became House Speaker only after a number of votes, which is very unusual, which showed how divided internally the Republicans were about the direction of the party. The hardliners, the most sort of rabid pro-Trump element to the Republican Party, is very skeptical of Kevin McCarthy, and he's serving basically at the mercy of this element of the Republican Party. And one of the things that he's done to try to placate them is to advance this impeachment inquiry. So you have this impeachment inquiry, and it's what the hard line of the pro-Trump Republicans want. But it's not clear that it's going to get anywhere close to an impeachment. For them, it doesn't necessarily matter because they're using this as a way to sort of establish this narrative around the Bidens, around Joe Biden, around Hunter Biden. And you have to think that in the entire Biden family, the weakest link probably is Hunter Biden, given the problems that he's had. And this is something that the so-called Freedom Caucus, or these sort of hard-right Republicans, they're not even trying to hide this fact. They're using this impeachment inquiry as this massive messaging tool. And if you think about it, this is something that Republicans historically have been very good at doing. So there'll be this continual effort to try to drum up headlines in this area. But it's almost like the medium is the message. In this case, the message is the message. And the message is, we think that there could be corruption, we must investigate. But it may never actually get to anything that approaches a tangible result showing that there was corruption by Hunter Biden related to Joe Biden.
Okay, so perhaps the Republicans don't even care whether this impeachment inquiry leads to an impeachment, but really it'll do its job if it just harms Joe Biden's image enough. Which brings us to, I guess, Hunter Biden's other problem, which is just last week he was indicted on federal firearms charges. So a possible criminal trial is looming there. Is that just going to add to Joe Biden's negative narrative, I guess, that the Republicans are spinning?
Yes. I mean, again, this is something that's sort of layered over the impeachment talk, the corruption talk. So Hunter Biden had purchased a handgun, and in the purchase of the handgun, he had to fill out paperwork, basically his good character, why he should have this permit for this weapon. In the process of filling it out, he allegedly lied on these documents. It's just emerged that he plans to fight this indictment. But what it's done is it's drawn more attention onto the case of Hunter Biden, his judgment, whether or not he committed a crime. I mean, again, this handgun legality, the handgun ownership violation, I mean, this is very tangential to all these other issues that we're talking about. But in the great sort of roar of headlines and the constant feed of news emanating and being promoted around a particular person in the public, which is Hunter Biden, people often don't distinguish. And so this is something that I think that we'll hear a lot more about. And it is ironic too when you think about it, because he is being charged for this violation around his weapons permit. But this is in a country where 18-year-olds can rock up to gun shows and buy AR-15 assault weapons with no questions asked. So the gun laws vary from state to state and city to city. But I mean, it's stunning, really, when you think about it. But this is going to be another talking point, and this is real. So this is something that is being contested in court.
And so all of this is obviously an unwelcome distraction for Joe Biden. But is it possible that what seems like a manufactured scandal about corruption will blow up in the GOP's face?
It's possible. I mean, to me, the interesting thing to watch is, you've got these sort of competing narratives going on. And what the Republicans are doing is very much consistent with what they have done in past political campaigns, going back for many years. I mean, going back to the Bill Clinton era, if you think about the Monica Lewinsky scandal, the Republicans had a message machine that was running 24/7 about what is the message today about Monica Lewinsky and the scandal in the White House. They had that curated and down to sort of, it was like a machine, how well that worked in that time. They understood the channels of distribution of this message. And this is all very much just at the dawn of the internet. That machine has only gotten stronger in the intervening years, and Trump has shown new dimensions of this. The issue is, how effective is that? While the Biden administration, in my view, looks like it's trying to build not just a new machine, but a new sort of political reality. They're trying to rebalance what the understanding of politics and what is fair in American democracy is. And this is why they're doing lots of messaging around fairness in the workplace, around rebuilding the economy, growing the economy from the bottom up and from the inside out. And they're doing it on the bet that if this new reality becomes established enough in the voting public's mind, it could be enough to supplant this much more aggressive sort of accusation-based politicking that the Republicans have engaged in for so long. So to me, it's a fascinating moment because you're watching this sort of collision of these two worlds and these two understandings of how American politics work.
And it's interesting what you talk about there with the sort of two competing, I guess, forms of government, really, or ways to handle the country, which obviously we've got the 2024 presidential election looming. That's the next major milestone. So I guess to wrap up, are these so-called Biden crimes, alleged crimes, are they great enough, do you think, to overpower the concerns that so many voters currently have about Trump?
Yeah, I mean, that's the bet, I think, on the Republican side is that they can get them in an equal place in people's minds. So people, a lot of voters, they don't care about the details so much. They just, if they hear this drumbeat about the Biden crimes, the Biden crime family and the like, is that enough to supplant all this other talk they're going to hear about the 4 concurrent federal cases against Trump related to his time in office and in the 2020 election. So he's got a total of 91 charges that he's facing. I mean, is it enough to elevate the volume on these Biden crimes high enough to where people that Trump will need to win the 2024 election, that they will not care about the charges against Trump and instead focus on Biden? I don't know. I really don't know. It's a fascinating moment to watch. But that does seem to be the game plan, is to elevate the concern, the suspicion around the Biden family to the level that it eclipses the actual news that's coming out around these trials related to Trump and the 2020 election.
Well, Chris, clearly there's going to be a lot of headlines. I can only imagine how many there'll be before we get to the next presidential election. We're so lucky that we have you covering this. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Sam. It's a pleasure.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Julia Carr-Katzel. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Selinger Morris. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.